Michael, thanks for coming on. Really appreciate your time.
No, no worries. Good to be here.
Good man, good man. So yeah, I think the best way, it's a bit cliche, and I know a lot of podcasts start like this, but it does give a story to the individual. So if you could just give us a bit of an insight about your career today and where you are at the moment, that'd be amazing.
Yeah, sure. Michael Butcher. I'm 42 years old. Let's start with the basics. Married, two kids. I live down in Bournemouth. Um, this has not been a natural progression to where I am. This is not the usual FD journey, I guess, is the first thing to say. Started out, went to university. Important to note, family live in the West Midlands. That's where our business is sort of located at the moment. Um, Moved to Aberdeen for university. Great 4 years there, studying psychology with a bit of philosophy and criminal law thrown in. Then went to Liverpool to do another master's in psychology, and then ended up doing sales for a year. Got so it was a plan to do 2 years and then go back and do a PhD in investigative psychology. My dissertation was on the links of suicide and themes in suicide notes. Um, so what that has to do with accountancy, no one really knows. But I sort of um, year in sales, and then the plan was to go and do a year in finance, work out what this business thing is that my dad did or whatever, and yeah, ended up down in Slough, working for Grant Thornton in their audit team. Literally had no idea who they were when I went in. Lucked my way through the interview. The day of the interview, I drove down and picked up the FT and thought that's my interview prep, right? Career through Grant Thornton, audit, forensics, and corporate finance, and then ended up down on the south coast working for small practice, and then up to PepsiCo. Did an interim assignment there. Then to Merlin, I was there for their IPO, and then to a small company down in Bournemouth called it was then called Quantum, now known as Affordable Homes and Healthcare. Great learning experience, really entrepreneurial business. But in the background, my parents had been in social care since 1997. They bought their first care home then. Dad was in tech, done a couple of PE deals, had enough money to do it as you could back then. And gradually the business had grown. I've been supporting from the wings, helping out with some refinancing and some strategic stuff. There was a bookkeeper and she was keeping the numbers going, but there was some top level stuff that I was helping out with. And eventually my dad just said, look, 2016, 2017, we're about to acquire number four. There were some other acquisitions, which, one fell through. We made the other two in 2019. And he said, look, we need an FD. We need someone to come on board and just run this bit. What he didn't say was this bit is just, it's not finance, it's everything back office. And that's very much what I did. Although day one, week one, was fascinating in that I joined and CQC had just come into one of our care homes and absolutely ripped us a new one. So
Oh wow.
yeah, so week one was don't do anything, don't talk to anyone, just read this. And it was just all the regulations, everything you need, I could possibly need to read about social care. Week two was literally sat in a residence room, an empty residence room at one of this particular care home, rewriting the governance system and building spreadsheets to help us track weights, which was back in 2017 was stuff we didn't have. We had paper, everything was on paper because of course it was. So we were still tracking things, weekly. We were doing monthly Waterlows, but what was last month's Waterloo? Where's this? Who's done the must assessment and all this stuff. And it was just incredibly, I don't want to say basic, it's the wrong word, but it just was unsophisticated. So to go from a world of Pepsi, Merlin, what we were doing over at Quantum, to this was just a huge change. And working for my family's business. So yeah, been there since 2017. And I think head of finance is better described of everything that could be an acronym. So head of IT, HR, health and safety, GDPR, data, payroll, everything back office. But
Yeah.
that's the nature of being in social care, right? Everyone wears multiple hats, and you're always focused about the care. The care comes first, and everything else is about that, right?
Yeah, no, 100%. And no, that's a really, really interesting journey. And like you said to start with, it's the unusual route. But I guess, the pathway to go and work with your family just opened up. Um, so in terms of kind of the setup now, how many homes does the group have at the moment?
So 6 homes, 203 beds, around about 300 team members.
Okay, amazing. Good size. And in terms of kind of just a bit more about your kind of remit in terms of what is the kind of team setup at the moment?
So we really have evolved since I guess 2020. So we entered
I guess
COVID.
everyone had to, didn't they?
Well, yeah, yeah. Um, I think we well, first of all, we got really lucky in that at the back end of 2019, my father and my brother-in-law went to Wuhan in China, which was where they say the outbreak started. And my brother-in-law came back with a really nasty flu. And as a result, I think our ears were up as to what was going on. And we made some really quick decisions early 2020 to go, actually, you know what, we're going to treat this differently than we would if it was SARS. And we're going to go through a process. So I think we were lucky in a way that we had some processes and systems in place before everybody else. Um, Also, I think our business has always been set up so that we can work remotely. The principle being our business is 24/7, 365. If it's Christmas Day and there's an issue, the directors need to be able to resolve it. So we were already in the process of moving our business into this remote environment. We were using Skype rather than Teams, but we very quickly moved to Teams. We'd implemented our electronic care management system. We were cloud based for finance. You know, unsophisticated, but we were already moving that in that way. Um, so everything was already changing for us, but we went from two bookkeepers in 2020, and now we're at two finance assistants. We've got a part-time credit controller, and we've got a finance manager. But that's because it's not. It's for the same work. We had 6 care homes, both instance. It's just the level of the workload that we're having to deal with, the sophistication of the data that we're processing, and the need to have team resource to be able to analyze and fix problems and identify problems has dramatically grown. I'd probably say that my team now, and there's some automation in this, right? So we invoicing to residents and to other funders. That is now automated. It's a day and a half. Purchase invoices, that's half a day a month. So half a day a week. Sorry, when we're scanning those in. We automate everything that we can, but 80% of my team's time is probably spent on resolving queries with funders or privately funded residents, and that's because of the complexity of the funding structure that we have.
Yeah, yeah, no, 100%. Especially, and I think that's where obviously we'll touch on shortly, but where having that kind of the topic of the importance of having someone with that finance background within a care provider can really kind of have a positive impact for those involved. And I think if we just something you wrote on your post previously, which just read it out here, social care is where great FDs are made. I think there's so much positivity, I think, within the social care space. But what do you mean by that in your words?
Um, so I think social care is, first of all, it's a sector you can very very easily be passionate about. I think it's difficult to be passionate about making widgets or selling software. I'm sure you can be, but it's a heck of a lot easier to be passionate about caring for people. And I think a great FD is someone who can tie the operations to the finance and is constantly saying, okay, actually, yes, the numbers are important. Yes, I'm going to tell you what's gone on. I'm going to provide my forecasts, but I'm always going to have to tie it to the operational part of the business. And with care, we say we run a care home business in that order of priority. Get the care right, get the property right, the business will and the numbers will follow. And that's very much what makes a great FD, that operational focus. But going back to what you pointed out, that positivity, it is a really collaborative environment. We're all working together. The number of times I've picked up the telephone to FDs and gone, look, I just need a bit of help here. I can see that you're involved in this part of it. Can you just give me 15 minutes? And we all share. And in my experience, I've never experienced loneliness as an FD. There's always been someone at the end of a phone who I can pick up the phone to and go, I just need to talk something through with you. It may be a shot into social media dark and say, can anyone help? Or I'm part of something called Care Leaders Network. And then people in there and just saying, can anyone help? But that's been a surprising positive of the sector for me. And I think being passionate about what you do is an important part of being an FD. I had two other things. One, the simple breadth of the sector. We specialise in elder person care home, we specialise in complex dementia care. Social care is not just that. I think if you'd watch the popular media, it is just that. But as well as care in care homes, it's care at home, the domiciliary care market. It's young people, it's children, it's mental health, it's young adults, it's acquired brain injury, the list, it's palliative care. The list goes on, and it's also the interface of that with the NHS and how we should be working much more closely together. So it's an incredibly broad sector. There's something there for everyone and every FD, but it's again easy to find your niche and find something that you're passionate about, and then and talking about your career and what you get to do as a finance director, the sector expertise that the role expertise that you build is absolutely amazing. So do we have private limited companies? Yes, of course we do. Family owned or investor backed? Yes, absolutely. Do we have private equity? Yes, we do. Do we have REITs and OpCo, PropCo structures and offshore structures? Yep, absolutely. Overseas investment? Yep, absolutely got that. Do we have debt refinancing? Do we have M&A? Yes, absolutely, we've got that. We've got the large corporates, the Barchesters of this world, all the way through to single operators. So you've got this huge scale that you can work in, and then we've got CQC, and it's a really regulated sector. And luckily CQC for the vast majority of the sector don't touch the financial regulations. The top 25 do, and hey, that's got to be a challenge, right? But working within that regulated sector, again, it's something else to add to the mix. So yeah, a sector you can be passionate about, a sector where there's lots of difference and lots of different things to go and try and explore if you're entering the sector. But it's a sector that's going to teach you a lot. And really, if you're talking about a young 30-something going, okay, I'm a finance analyst, or I'm just leaving practice, where do I go? It can teach you so much very, very quickly. And I haven't even touched on year-end audits yet.
Yeah, no, of course. And I think you're spot on with what you're saying. And I think I've had previous conversations with other senior leaders about how, whether it's, go in as a support worker, for argument's sake, you can then go into a registered manager or the ops side or regional director, operations director, learning development. Do you know what I mean? I think across the whole social care sector, as well as the finance side, your career can go in so many different avenues that it's hard to get bored, because there's something always new and exciting or different routes you can go down when the time's right.
Yeah, absolutely. No 2 days are the same, and we will constantly, and that's the great thing about social care, right? It's always changing. The last 5 years have been a great example of that. How we've dealt with a crisis. COVID was a crisis, right? But then we've evolved through, and we've said, actually, you know what? We're going to change, and we're going to change again, and we're going to keep changing. We're now in this position of, no, I actually need to absolutely keep evolving, and that's our regulated requirement. That good today is no longer good tomorrow. We must constantly improve. and having that mindset throughout the team is critical, including in the finance function.
Yeah, no, 100%. No, spot on. Love that. In terms of kind of moving on slightly in terms of as a care provider, you mentioned funding comes from, private funding or local authorities, NHS, outside, inside investment, wherever. There's so many different angles money comes from. How important is it for a care provider to make sure they've got that financial director in, or really experienced finance manager, or that finance professional in place to support with the organisation?
It's a really interesting question because I think it depends on the size of the provider. Um, the sector, I think pre-COVID, 80% of it was individuals who owned one or two care homes. And I think we were at a position back then where actually you probably didn't need much in the way of financial sophistication. And I think a lot of care providers essentially worked on a cash in, cash out basis.
Yeah.
The problem that we have now is that the funding streams can be so mixed and so convoluted to actually get the money in that you often reach stages where you need someone in the background who's, if nothing else, got the time to be able to chase it down and to make sure, here's a resident, here's how they're being funded, here's the local authority element, here's the NHS element, here's even a private element. Have I got all of those amounts in for this month? Well, what about last month? What about next month? And that constant check. So I don't think it's necessarily about having a finance director. I think it's about having a sophisticated finance function with the time to do those checks. Now, clearly, when you get to 4, 5, 6 care homes, there is a tipping point at which you say, well, actually, we're now dealing with a business. In our case, we're doing 14 million turnover. There is a point at which you need to have someone senior going, okay, I'm going to oversee all of this and make sure the money is in the right pot at the right times. And then obviously, then you've got discussions with the bank, with other funders, and even with insurers these days, and they're starting to look at your numbers in a lot more detail. So it's having the sophistication to be able to have those conversations. But a quality finance manager, FC, can do that alongside the directors of the business. I guess it's easier for me to talk about it as it's a family business. We're all in on this, so this is personal to me, and I can be passionate about the business because it's our business, and that I think that supports those conversations a little bit more. But it's not to say that a group the same size of us, would they need a finance director? It's an interesting question. I think they might just need a sophisticated finance function.
Yeah, and I guess you can always get someone in to help you set that up, and then it kind of can help run the process, I guess, once it's set up, isn't it?
Yeah, I know there's an interesting sort of movement at the moment, I guess, of fractional FDs and people doing sort of part-time FD work for multiple care operators. I think that's something that the sector is starting to accept and use. And I think that gives the sophistication, and the insight that you need, but at a cost base that is actually affordable. Again, that's one of the problems with social care is that we want to spend every pound we can on our residents and the people we care for. Spending, frankly, for an FD, £100,000 to £150,000 a year plus tax, whatever. That's a big chunk of cash. So how do we justify that? What value do they add to the business? So a fractional FD may be a better way of going.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think we see that with other roles where there's a lot more consultancies around at the moment, a lot more consultants that can actually offer their service for a few months a year instead of bringing in someone on a full-time salary. And I think it all comes down to cost, how much you need them and stuff like that, I guess. But I think it's definitely an angle we see more and more providers going. But if there was a provider, I don't know, let's say 10 beds, not 10 sites, sorry, looking at that kind of transition into whether we need an FD, do we not, kind of what makes a good FD? What should providers be looking out for when making that decision?
Um, so I think as I said before, it's someone who can be operationally focused, and to understand that care can sometimes be life or death. I think there are very few businesses where it is life and death. Actually, social care is one of them. So it's understanding the importance of that element to it. Um, and that's, yeah, having that multifaceted FD, being able to do multiple different things. And I think that if you just go, so yeah, I'm just going to be your FD, I'm just going to do finance and that's it. Well, what about the IT, the health and safety, the HR, all the other bits of back office stuff? I think there's an interesting inflection point at sort of 6 care homes to 10 care homes, because you then start to say, well, actually, I can afford to have someone to, some function to manage HR, some function to manage health and safety, and what have you. So it's understanding how you want to operate, that sort of philosophy of the business. Do we want to have, the traditional structure of the pyramid and hierarchical teams, or do we outsource or whatever? So I think, understanding that element of your business, how do you want to structure it, and then bringing a finance person in to support that is great. But you've simply just got to be able to wear multiple hats. And for me, and we'll probably come on to it, but finance is now part of the data cycle, and being able to correlate how your care operates and how your finance function sort of reflects that and tie that data together is absolutely critical. You've got two other things that I'd sort of be looking for if I was sort of recruiting a finance director. One is they simply have to be able to talk to non-finance types. And I know that's a sort of a generic, of course you've got to have it. You've got to remember that the registered managers who you're dealing with are fundamentally carers who have been promoted through. I get caught out regularly. And yesterday I sent an email saying, just want to discuss something in your P&L. Telephone call comes back. What's a P&L? And well, remember we talked about EBITDA? Yeah, it's the financial statement that makes that up. Oh right, okay, got it. Yeah, and it's not a criticism of the manager. They need to know so much other stuff that not knowing one financial acronym is never going to be a criticism. But the ability to have that conversation and to put numbers to a non-financial person is absolutely fundamentally critical in social care. So having someone with that communication experience and ability to talk to non-financials types, but at the same time, to be able to go and talk to bankers, to be able to talk to insurers, to be able to talk to private equity or investors or high net worth individuals, having the ability to move between those two skill sets is critical. And I guess finally, and I define this as simple sophistication. Social care, in care homes in particular, but social care in general, we have a few KPIs that are really quite straightforward. Average weekly fee, staff cost percentage of revenue, for us, loan to value, and EBITDA multiple of debt as a multiple of EBITDA. You can fundamentally run the business just by moving those levers. Having a finance system and structure and reporting process, and I think a finance thought process that takes you all the way through the business but focuses on those core KPIs, it's got to be sophisticated. You've got to have really good reporting, and there's got to be some decent spreadsheets behind it to allow you to build that out and to analyze it in sufficient detail that you can pull the levers when you need to, when you see an error or you see issues. But at the same time, it's got to be simple, because I think you can overcomplicate finance, and I don't think social care is where you do that. I think so, simple but sophisticated, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and you mentioned about kind of managers. I feel like home managers have a lot more expectation potentially than they had previously in terms of needing to kind of obviously the care side comes first, but understand more about the commercial side of it, the business side of it. There's a lot more that goes into a care home manager's role. How do you kind of support your managers with that kind of progression, I guess.
Um, so again, this comes down to corporate philosophy or company philosophy. Um, we so we believe, and I don't think we may not be unique, but I don't think we're the norm on this. We think that each individual care home should be run individually and not part of a group. Yes, there are group functions that we provide and group support, and we have common IT providers and common websites providers, and we market in a similar way. But each care home is different, and there are nuances to it. So how the commercials work for one care home will not be the same as the other. And so the manager has to be empowered to make certain commercial decisions and to understand the parameters around it. Again, this goes back to the simplicity of the business. It's, okay, you need to staff your business. Okay, what are the parameters of that? I'm not going to give you, I'm not going to give you a budget as a certain absolute figure, but I'm certainly going to give you a percentage of revenue. And if your revenue drops below a certain number, or your staff costs rise above a certain percentage, we are going to have a conversation.
Yeah.
That means that your revenue has got to be driven by occupancy and average weekly fee. Okay, so if you can grow your average weekly fee, I'm not going to be too upset if your occupancies are a couple off. But if your occupancy's off and your average weekly fee is off, and your staff costs are too high, then we're going to have a conversation. And we take that approach, very much giving ownership to the managers. The problem with that is, like you said, they have far too much responsibility already from CQC, and the new CQC regulations and the reporting requirements within that have just exacerbated that. They now need to be pushing data to CQC almost on a, if not weekly, then maybe even a daily basis. So then saying, okay, you're now responsible for some pretty core parts of the financial structure of this company, this care home. Okay, what can we take back from you? So we provide a little bit of additional staffing resource into each of the care homes to around deputies and administrators to make sure they've got that support. But behind the scenes within the finance function, and we outsource quite a bit as well, we make sure that the back office stuff is all done for them, so they just don't have to worry about it. And that's a question of IT, it's a question of automation, it's a question of, again, simple sophistication.
Yeah, no, that's spot on, because you don't want to take away the care aspect because you're caught up in doing so many other tasks, which obviously are paramount. But the care, as you rightly mentioned, is the foundation of any good care home.
Yeah, and it's also about giving them the ownership of their team. So for example, we make sure that every step of recruitment is done in the care homes, because there is nothing worse than the manager saying, I didn't recruit this person, they're not my fault. No, you recruited them, they're your fault, fix the problem. You have to have ownership of that. But the other side of that is that means there has to be a process behind the scenes to support the manager at every stage of recruitment. And because they can't do everything. Okay, so what do we take back? And it's that mindset that I think that we work really hard to do. And it's not easy. We don't always get it right. And I think a lot of people, when they come into our organisation, don't get it first time. It can take a couple of months for the managers to sort of stop asking, can I do this? It's like, yeah, it's your care home, go and do it. Make it happen. Why are you asking me? Go and run your business. And that's scary for managers, but hopefully it's empowering. But that's our philosophy.
Yeah,
And I
no,
know that there are
100%.
other organisations who are much more top down. No, you will operate in this way, and you will not change. So horses for courses.
Yeah, no, of course. And I think it's a real empowering way to do things, kind of how Trust Hire is set up. Obviously, I know we're much smaller, but we're looking to bring some people on over the next kind of 12 months. And it is kind of, you come in, this is your patch, and then you got full autonomy. Like you said, you mark down figures of where you roughly need to be, but how you deliver that is kind of on you. And I think that does give people the confidence and the power to kind of achieve it. So no, I think that's a really good way how you do things. I think if we look to kind of lastly touch on we won't go into too much detail, as I know there's another podcast regarding this, but obviously the kind of the FD data and the kind of how they work together. What does that? Can you just give us a bit of a brief on what that looks like?
So, so social care has embraced technology, which is much more of a change than I care to mention. I think back in
Finally.
27, well, yeah, yeah, yeah. What I mean, it's. I think what's been interesting is the delay in that is actually caused by. It's not caused by the sector per se and the people, by the care home and providers. What it is, I think, is caused by a lack of great software, but also, and we tried to implement electronic care plans in one of our care homes. I think 2012, 2013. CQC came in and said, "We hate it. Rip it out. It's not safe." Okay, that's not great. So the world has evolved. Okay, so we are now in an environment where we have electronic care plans, we have electronic timelines, telling us what's going on. We've got electronic medication, we've got falls detection, we've got pain check, system like pain checks of how much pain are you in just by your facial expressions. Um, we are drowning in data. So it's not so much, what does, how do we collect the data? It's how do we use it? And that's the one thing that finance functions are traditionally really, really good at. We're great at collecting loads and loads of finance data, but actually then reporting on it and making actionable insights. That's what we do day to day, right? So the podcast, which quick shout out here, is with Care Leaders Network, hopefully coming out on YouTube and all good Spotify channels and what have you later. What we dived into there was very much around how data analysis can function, but it needs to be thought of as a philosophy. What's the objective of your data analysis? What are you trying to get to? For me, and I, as I mentioned this in the other podcast, I don't think of myself really as head of finance anymore. Very much, I'm now head of data, because I've got we collect finance data and we use it. We collect care data and we use it. And my job, I think, is to look back 12 months and look at the historics, but it's also to project forward and to say, what else do we need to do? And having the ability to do that across finance data and care data, I think is much more important and empowering to the business. So again, it goes back to the point of, do we need a finance director? At a 30 care home group, 100 million turnover, something like that. Yeah, you probably need a head of finance, but you probably also need a head of data, and I think the head of finance reports into that. But that's a very brave new world for social care, and one that I think we're just slowly starting to get to grips with. And we're reacting to, as I said earlier, the changes in CQC regulations and their requirement for us to be reporting to them on a much more regular basis. Is now very much we are pushing data onto them rather than CQC requesting it. And I think that came in this year. I don't think we as a sector have rapidly evolved to meet that requirement, but I can see that changing. So the position of data and data analysis is in the organisation is going to change. I think before it was something we did in order to support operations. Now I think in many respects operations creates data and analysis, and we do the analysis to drive the operations and to actually meet our regulatory requirements, which is a brave new world, and it's quite exciting. And I think if you're in finance, I think we often have the skill set to be able to support that and do that. So I think it becomes quite exciting for the function.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think, data is great if you use it the right way. So I think, having a real focus on that, it's only going to drive performance and success and create, better homes and working environments for people to be part of, which, is fundamentally what it's all about at the end of the day.
Yeah, and it's about the care, right? And I think the whole set again. This was what it is great about social care is that once you strip us all back, we are about care with a capital C. And how do we care for the people that we care for, and how do we make today the best we can, and how do we make sure that tomorrow is even better? And increasingly, that was a very well. It still is a very empathetic position. We have amazing people doing superhuman tasks on a daily basis. I've tried being a carer. I'm not very good at it. So the people who are great at it, it's amazing to watch. But how can we support them to know what to do tomorrow, or to see patterns, or to go, actually, you know what? Let's just stop what we're doing here and do something completely different, because what we were doing before wasn't working. And we're all learning so much more now about, in our particular case, about nutrition and what we're eating and how we're eating it. One small thing, I've gone a bit of a health kick recently, and started drinking protein shakes to support that. Through that learning, I've just gone to one of the managers. Well, why aren't how much protein are our residents having? And we started totting it up and go, actually, we could add more here. So we're now giving them a mousse for pudding, which is made out of a protein shake. Just that and a bit of milk and a bit of cream, just to make a mousse. Not only are the residents that we're giving this to putting on weight, brilliant, but their skin is improving, and they're getting fewer skin tears and bruises, and their general health is improving. And that is the impact that great data can have. We just now need to automate that, because it was a manual process. But so again, that's the exciting bit of care, and where you can get really passionate and engaged, is that one small thing can make a huge difference.
Yeah, no, love that. No, that's really, really great. Lastly, we'll just kind of, we'll look to wrap up in a moment. And in terms of look, we've got the general election coming up in the not so distant future. What would you, as a senior figure within a care provider, what would you like to see kind of happen in that time frame to kind of give you confidence that change is going to happen? And obviously, I know it's it's not an easy question to answer, but kind of something that initially just comes to your head.
There's personal story of my mother and her sister went on holiday to Ireland. They were flying out of Dublin, and they were down in Cork, and they got properly lost in the sort of the fields around it on the way to Dublin in the car. So they see a local farmer, pull over. I'm not going to do the accent because I'll get slated for it. But they pull over and they say, "Excuse me, but we're going to Dublin. How do we get to Dublin from here?" And the farmer turns back and goes, "Well, you wouldn't want to be starting from here, would you?" And that's, I think, where social care is at. We know what the end goal needs to be, but where we are right now is completely the wrong place to start the fix from. And I think we've got a huge number of changes that need to be made in order to get to that end point. It comes down to a question of philosophy, though. And I think we're all generally in agreement that the next government will be largely Labour-led, either with a very large majority or at least enough of a majority to get a few things done. I don't think it's a fully left-leaning Labour government, centre-left at best. So I'm not expecting social care to be completely government funded. I think there is a question as to whether social care should be 100% government funded. So the second you need any care for dementia, Alzheimer's, in our particular case, elder person, no, okay, the state will pay for that in whatever guise. And I think it is remarkable, and it is a point that I profoundly disagree with on a personal level, that having a disease, dementia is the only disease that you have to pay for privately, and you have to privately pay for your care. And I think with the NHS, that still sits in a slightly wrong position for me morally. So the answer to your question, I'll get there eventually, is that we need to start to evolve how social care works and the NHS works and healthcare works away from this 1950s model. So we need to find some form of integration between social care and healthcare. Now, I'm not saying that we should have a national care service. I think that, but I do think that we should look to move, and this is controversial, I think we should look to move social care outside of local authorities. I think that historically that was the right place for them, but now you've got local authorities spending 60, 70, 80% of their budget on social care, and that's putting other local authority services at risk. And I think that feels wrong. So
Yeah.
finding some way of stripping that out of the local authority, plonking it somewhere else, not necessarily into the NHS, although that would make sense because there are similarities in how brokerage work and how commissioning work across the two. So there's some empires in both that would get shaken up, and you need to migrate it. So challenging to do. But once you've achieved that and you've started to you sort of hived out the local authority services and gone, okay, social care, healthcare, talk to each other better, you can then start to have conversations around, okay, how do we fund this properly? And if it is all going to be government funded, in whatever guise that is, or state funded, what does that mean for the financial sustainability of the providers? And what do they look like? And let's just be clear. We know very, very clearly that if we implemented the Dilnot proposals back in, so when was that? It was 2 years ago? If we had implemented it, we as a country would have incurred and funded it so that everything was the same, we would have incurred an additional £3.5 billion a year of cost. So getting social care fully funded through the state is not going to be cheap. I think that political reality is not being expressed fully by current politicians in the current electoral cycle. I think that's because it's an incredibly complicated conversation to be having, and they're probably rightly going, we're not going to talk about social care, we're going to let that can go down the road, and we're going to solve it later because we've got other more important conversations to be having. I think politically that makes sense right now. But finding a way of finding that additional funding, I think that's the next step. Once you've got the structure
That's the
right.
challenge.
Yeah. How do you do it? Well, I think cutting taxes is the wrong way to do it. I think you'd need to go, okay, we're going to raise taxes to raise funding for this particular part of social care. The problem is people then say, well, that funding that you're increasing is going to go to private providers who are private equity backed, who have got debt funding. So actually, this is leaving the sector. So I think that the next stage, and again, this is great fun. Actually, get to be really controversial. I would almost certainly look to bring care provision into some form of government or state funded, certainly so that private equity funding or debt funding doesn't exist. So that may not necessarily be state ownership. It may be that local authorities and backed by the government actually provide the quote unquote private equity or the debt funding strips that support our businesses, so that the funding becomes circular. Yes, a large proportion of it will go to wages. That's fine. That's the way it's meant to be, right? But then, the 10% of a care home's revenue that goes on debt funding, more by the way, if you're private equity backed, that's just going to recirculate back into central coffers and can go again. So yeah, I'd be looking at structuring rather than major policy changes. But I'd certainly be looking at having some form of much better integration of social care and healthcare, and I'd certainly look
100%.
at how the care providers are funded and try and get them funded by the state rather than private institutions.
Yeah, no, I think that's some really fair points, and let's hope that in time, the right changes will slowly. I think it will be slowly, but hopefully the right changes start to be made. That will support everyone involved in the sector. But yeah, let's leave it there. Michael, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate that, buddy.
No worries, Josh. Really appreciate it. Thanks for you.
Cheers, Michael.